Hello, and thank you for
Hi,
joining us
everybody.
for our latest Finovate webinar. Great digital experiences can't be bought, they must be built. I'm David Penn, Research Analyst with Finovate. Leading our conversation today is Eric Newcomer. He is the Chief Technology Officer with WSO2. Our discussion today will explore best practices in accelerating innovation and meeting client demands, how to simplify complex modern innovation platforms, and the benefits of cloud and digital apps, and implementing a platform as a service solution as a part of your strategy. Before we begin, please know that this is going to be an interactive presentation. There's going to be an opportunity for you to ask your questions toward the end of our presentation. There's also going to be the opportunity for you to participate in the presentation by way of our interactive polls. So stay tuned for those coming up a little bit later on in the presentation. So without that out of the way, we've got quite a bit to cover. So let's go ahead and get started. Eric, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks everyone for joining. I'm Eric Newcomer, CTO at WSO2. Before joining WSO2, I spent about 10 years financial services companies as chief architect at Credit Suisse for the investment bank, chief architect at Citi for the institutional bank. So before that, I was in the vendor world. So I've been kind of in the vendor technology space, financial services space, now back to vendor technology space. What I want to cover today spans across both. I want to talk about things from the customer perspective, from the vendor perspective, and see how we can bring all these things together to talk about how to speed innovation and speed up delivery of these great digital experiences, which, as the title says, you can't buy. You have to build them, and we'll talk about that. And of course, the short summary there is, if you could buy it, everybody would have the same thing. And of course, digital experience is a big point of competition now, and therefore that has to be taken as the expression of the unique value and the differentiated value of the financial company, of any company in the marketplace. All right, so I'll talk a little bit about WSO2 very briefly. We're a global company, about 17 years old, primarily open source, well known for API management solutions, identity access management solutions. Offices around the globe, grew 30% last year, and we're working on new solutions for the digital economy based on our good foundation of our open source products and success with those, and getting ready for the next round of growth here. All right, with that, we'll just dive in to the subject matter, and I've got a couple of scene setters here and talking about why it's important to build things and what the challenges are around building them. And then a little bit later, I'll talk about what it is we're doing here at WSO2 to try to help with these, meet these challenges. But I think most of the focus should really be what I'm going to talk about. Most of it will be on how to do it, why to do it, and what makes sense to think about in terms of the challenges to overcome, to speed that innovation to market through digital platform and cloud native technology, and how that's all going to help you get your business value out there expressed in digital channels, which is the big challenge. This is just to paint a picture of the landscape in which we are working today with distributed applications for those digital experiences and how they get delivered. So of course, this trend started of commercial applications and digitization way back in the mainframe era 50, 60 years ago, where you had one application generally running on one machine, and you would go to that machine in the computer room to use it. And things have really, of course, changed quite a bit since then. And today, in fact, on your pocket, on your mobile phone, you have a computer that's thousands of times more powerful than that original mainframe, which was the original way that digital apps were delivered back in the day. They called them automation of manual processes, of course, and when the computer industry started. And the evolution has gone through client server, desktop PCs, World Wide Web apps, into mobile apps, IoT, and beyond. Now we're hearing about metaverse concepts and Web 3.0 concepts, and there's a lot of hype out there right now, so we don't really know exactly what these things are quite yet, but we can imagine that the trend is just going to continue, and be pretty clear about that whatever goes on in the metaverse and whatever happens to Web 3.0, the trend toward distributed applications is going to continue, and having to deliver those digital experiences into an environment in which parts of the application are running on different computers, running on multiple computers. Some parts of the application are running on the mobile app, some parts on the server. And as we go forward, this is just going to continue, that we're going to be looking at a world in which digital transformation, digital experience apps are running on multiple computers that have to be coordinated and work together to seamlessly deliver that solution. So challenge number one, figuring out how to innovate in an environment that's continually and becoming more and more distributed, with more and more types of computers being involved in the application in some way. All right, so it's another trend, of course, that everybody is seeing is that customers are really starting to expect a great digital experience from the organizations they do business with. You know, and I was at Citi during the pandemic, working in the consumer bank, and we certainly had the pressure to digitize during the pandemic when the branch offices were closed and you couldn't go there to take advantage of some of the services that at that time were only available in the branch. So the pressure, as I'm sure everyone will resonate with everyone, the pressure started to come to immediately digitize and make everything available online because people were just not able to go into the banks. And now, even more than just being able to deliver those services digitally, customers are also evaluating businesses in the quality of that experience they're getting from those digital channels. So of course, online shopping, a very common example, where you might have something such as a digital double emerging in the industry that's representing you as the shopper, that has to be somehow represented as the person or a virtual person that navigates through a store. And that concept is, of course, becoming applied more broadly to digital experiences. But just other characteristics of them worth mentioning is that customers expect these digital experiences to be personalized and reactive, predictive, always on, highly available, always scale to whatever load, and adaptive to whatever they are doing and intuitive. And they will judge one company by another. And I think historically, banking customers might have judged a bank a bit on the branch office they would go into and the type of service they would get and the ambience, the atmosphere. And now they're judging the bank on the quality of the mobile app. I think it's not news to anyone, and the web app. And how do you, in that environment, stand out? How do you deliver this differentiated experience so that you can make sure to attract the customers that you need to continue your business? That is the challenge. And the challenge is expressed, or has to be expressed, in a way in which customers are responding to it in a positive way and better than the competitors. How do we do that? It's the next challenge in this world. So another thing, just to put this in a little different perspective, when we talk about the distributed environment, the highly distributed environment of mobile devices, world of IoT, metaverse, cloud computing, distributed apps. We talk about the digital experience that needs to be created. And this is part of the differentiation. Now, I've got an example that I kind of like from New York City. And New York City during the pandemic, the restaurants were also all closed. And they sought to close the gap for their business by doing takeout and delivery. And to do so, they turned to delivery apps, Uber Eats and DoorDash and others like this, and reservation apps, OpenTable, Resi, and so on, payment apps so they could get the payment done as well. And there was an article about this in the New York Times written about a year or so ago about how the restaurants realized by relying on these third parties for doing reservations, for doing payments, and for doing menus and all the these kind of displays for them and delivery apps, that they were being disintermediated from the customer. In other words, these apps were managing the customer data and managing the customer relationship, and this was something that they felt that they lost out on, because they were trying to compete with the digital experience. They were in an environment where customers could not come into the restaurant and take advantage of the ambience or qualities of service or glassware or decor to help give customers the experience they expect when going to a restaurant. So I find this as kind of a good analogy for what is it we're trying to accomplish with a customer experience. We're trying to, if you're a restaurant, you're trying to make the customer experience when you go there as part of the reason that you go there and go back. And if you're trying to now express that in a digital application for takeout or delivery you have to find some way of uniquely replicating that atmosphere, that environment, that experience to make you stand out from other restaurants, so customers will choose you for takeout and delivery when they can't go in. And these third-party apps were getting in the way of that because they were managing the customer data. It was hard for these companies, these restaurants, to get the feedback they needed to tune their applications to make them uniquely and to express that differentiation. So they started building their own solutions. And this is a good, for me, a good analogy for what everyone has to do. Everyone has to build their own solution, because how can you get it out there in the digital channel about your 3% cash back card, or your better way to apply for mortgages, or your better way to view your investments in your portfolio and make investing decisions, if you don't start working on this and getting those things out there and getting that feedback and have that customer relationship on which to build, to base it all. I was watching a video from Mark Zuckerberg the other day. It was a commencement address at Harvard when he was receiving an honorary degree. And he was talking about the whole Facebook experience and how they built that up. And something that stuck with me was, he said, you cannot solve the problem until you're working on it. You cannot know how to solve the problem until you start working on it. That is, they knew they wanted to create Facebook, but they didn't know what Facebook was going to be exactly until they started working on it and started trying things out, getting feedback from the users and tuning the application to improve, or whatever it may have become more lately, maybe less focused than it was at one point. But the point is, you have to get out there, start delivering these experiences to customers, start getting the feedback, so that you know that the problem you're working on, which is trying to create that great digital differentiated experience that provides the unique value of your business, goes out there correctly and gets the reception that you want. And the only way you can do that is to start getting those products out there as if you were a software company delivering a product. Again, the analogy from the tech industry that I think everyone's familiar with, Google will often provide new products as betas and have them in beta for a period of time where they collect the feedback and tune those products before they finalize them and put them out there. So that part about getting something out and getting the feedback and being able to iterate quickly is essential for being able to build these great digital differentiated experiences. So that's another challenge, and that's often a cultural challenge, especially for IT systems that have been designed more for supporting long-term projects. Of course, we saw this at Citi as well. The typical way to create a new application was to design a project, have a beginning, middle, and end when it went into production, and then put it into maintenance mode. Instead of that, for digital products to be able to iterate and get the feedback and work on something and constantly improve it, you have to think about getting that out there and iterating quickly and being more agile and more responsive and delivering these new iterations to the production very quickly. And it cannot be really a project mentality anymore. It has to be a product mentality, the way software companies do it. All right, so big challenge. A lot of challenges we talked about. Industries changing, digital disruptors have changed financial services, this way they've changed transportation and lodging and retail, especially, very famously, transportation, as I said. So digital disruption happening in all industries across the board. To respond to it, companies have to take up more technology concepts, become more like software companies, understand the distributed environment they're working in, and deal with this great experience technology as well. And how do you get this done, especially when the cloud is a very important part of it? The cloud is where you get that always-on feeling, you get the scalable capability. I remember years ago, Rolling Stones tickets would go on sales and websites would crash under the load. And you don't have that anymore because you have scalable clouds. And when you pick up your phone, applications are always on because the cloud is in back of them. You take the cloud for granted in some app like Uber that we're all familiar with, but that's what's driving that great interaction between the map and the servers that lets you see where the drivers are, lets you pay automatically with your credit card, lets you contact drivers find you. All of that is happening very fast between the interactive user app and the servers running in the cloud. And that's the kind of benefit of running in the cloud that you can get by innovating and taking advantage of that new technology. And this is the metaphor for how that new technology in the cloud can help. Code now, the cloud design pattern is to create a microservice or a small piece of functionality that can be deployed independently in a container and orchestrated. The crane here is the analogy for container orchestration. So you get to code into a container, and the analogy is like a shipping container, where it goes on a truck, goes on a ship, goes on a train. The container is the same size, and it can go, it really speeds intermodal transportation. In the same way, having your application code in a container speeds your ability to deploy and iterate and be agile and get that product out there and get a new version out after you get the feedback, and automate the process of deployment so that you can get new revisions out in a day or two instead of weeks or months, which has been typical for IT departments such as the ones I used to work in. And we were, part of my job there was, while I was there, was to move to the cloud, help us move to the cloud at City. And I brought in containers, and I brought in container orchestration technology, Kubernetes, and started that journey. Part of what I'm doing here at WSO2 is helping us also go on that journey toward the cloud. But back to the point about this, the automation is something that really, really helps because now you take advantage of breaking up the code into smaller pieces that can be iterated quickly, put those into containers, and have container orchestration deploy them out onto Kubernetes in the cloud, and solve that deployment part by through automation. However, automation introduces another complexity. So now we have another challenge, which is we have a great benefit available to us by going to the cloud and taking advantage of containers that run anywhere, and container orchestration that deploys those out into production very easily, very quickly, and automated. But it's like, another analogy here is, it's not quite correct, but it's similar to setting up an assembly line in an automobile manufacturing company. You may know at one time automobiles were created entirely by hand. Back in the early days, 1900s, 1910s, 1920s, there was no such thing as mass production of automobiles. Everybody just put all the pieces together one by one by hand. And Henry Ford invented the assembly line so you could have mass production of automobiles. But of course, you had to set up and invest in that assembly line technology. And here, you have to invest in setting up the automation. But one of the challenges in setting up the automation is that something will go wrong with it. Murphy's Law says that whatever can go wrong will go wrong. And in that automation, once it's all set up and running, there's often a chance for failure or some problem to arise. And here, you see the debugging chart. I'm not going to take you through it. I just want to make a point about this, which is when you go to container orchestration based on Kubernetes, you have the potential of, when a problem comes up, going through a difficult debugging task like this to try to fix the problem, which means now you need new skills, you need new expertise, and you need to have a whole different capability in the company than what you had before. Now, the big guys will set up entire teams. Uber I know the guy who used to run the SRE team for Uber, the site reliability engineering team. They were the ones responsible for setting up the Kubernetes clusters, running them in the cloud, debugging them, troubleshooting them. And they would take the handoff from the development team in the form of containers and Kubernetes config files and go out and deploy it. Now, that's fine if you have the type of financial resources, and if you're cloud first, as the way Uber is, or Google, or Amazon, or any of these new generation digital companies. But if you're trying to get into this and help support your digital transformation activities and getting your products out to market quickly through automation, this is going to be another challenge, is the complexity of that automation, setting it up and maintaining it. So how do we deal with all this? Well, some thoughts. Now going to switch a little bit to the vendor side in terms of what it is we're doing, and some thoughts that we're trying to put to this to help deal with this problem. So I think we have a couple of things going on here in this trend that need to be considered and addressed. And one of them, from the customer side, which we've been talking about, is all the challenges that need to be faced to be successful in building a great digital experience. And the main summary is you have to work on it. And that's what you want to do, is work on it and iterate and focus on that great digital experience and improving it. You don't want to focus on the infrastructure or the platform on which you're building it. Like we said, you cannot buy this differentiated experience, because otherwise everyone would have it. but you can buy the platform on which to build it. You can buy better tools for your developers to help them worry less about some of these complexities by abstracting them. And in particular, one area of the industry that's reaching that point of maturity where it can be abstracted away is Kubernetes, the container orchestration technology available on all cloud platforms today. And we can observe this anecdotally by just checking that, yes, Amazon has it, Google has it, Azure has it, Oracle has it, IBM has it, DigitalOcean, Linode, on-prem has it with OpenShift from Red Hat, Rancher, Nomad. Kubernetes is available everywhere, in the cloud, on-prem for private clouds. It's now the de facto deployment technology for your digital apps that supports this kind of automation that's needed to get those products out there quickly and iterate on them. So now we can say, all right, let's abstract this, because now we know Kubernetes is going to be everywhere. Let's go up the stack and let's make it easier for companies to create and deploy the digital apps so that they can just work on it, work on the iteration, and worry less about the platform. Platform you can buy to abstract this. And this is just an indication of one company that was doing this called Platformer, which we actually have acquired about a year ago and incorporated into our product set to help deal with this problem. So now, when you're talking about containerized applications and workloads and container orchestration, you can worry about how is this going to work across multiple clouds at this level now, because we're abstracting Kubernetes. Kubernetes runs on all the clouds. You have the same experience of development and deployment by abstracting Kubernetes. You can have the same solution for all these things on the top: identity access management, CI/CD automation, storage, monitoring, logging, online access, secrets, and config management. All of these things now can be done at this layer instead of having to be done cloud by cloud or IT environment by IT environment. So that's what we mean by you can't buy the experience, but you can buy the platform on which to build it. And this is our insight. We're working with companies and looking at this problem of you need to have a differentiated digital experience in order to compete in the digital economy. You have to be able to build that. Skill sets are in short supply. You may not be able to get more developers, more staff. They're busy with a lot of challenges in maintaining existing systems, but you can get better tools and you can get better help for them. And you can get a platform that's pre-built for this engineering practice that I've been talking about, how you deliver these digital experiences. So again, cannot buy the differentiated experience because everyone would have it, but you can buy the platform on which to work on it. As Mark Zuckerberg famously said, to get involved, get your hands on, get into the process of trying things out. That's the only way you're going to know whether you're succeeding or not in delivering the value that the customers want, delivering experience that customers want. You cannot decide this inside the company. You have to get out and get the reactions of the customers. And you need something. It's a digital, we call it a digital platform that abstracts the automation away and abstracts also the development environment. I'll talk about that in a minute, and helps you just focus on delivering that value. So the digital platform has got the collection of the capabilities in one box that you need to build and deliver those digital experiences. And on top of that, we've defined some digital experience engineering best practices that apply, across the board, whatever tool is being used, as to how it's best to go about this. So that's what we're doing from the vendor side. So I talked a bit about challenges from the customer side, a little bit about what we're doing to try to meet those challenges on the vendor side. Now I'll try to bring it all together in terms of what it is we're actually offering at the moment in this space. So we have a product called Choreo that we just released in March of this year. It's a software as a service product, runs in the cloud, delivers everything on Kubernetes automatically, and it's designed to build the APIs and integrations that are needed to power those great digital apps. And we talked about the Uber example before. Uber would not exist if not for the APIs that Google provided on top of Google Maps for them to use. So the interaction between the digital apps and the server is key. One of our competitors, MuleSoft, just released a survey of IT that they do every year, and their results showed that integration is the biggest inhibitor to success with digital applications. Integration with existing apps, with SaaS apps, with all kinds of technologies that need to be put together to allow that data to seamlessly flow to and from those great digital apps. A great user interface by itself is like a great flat screen TV without a streaming service. You just need that back end interactivity with the server to make everything come alive and make everything realize the value it has. So we're showing here, we have the marketplace of APIs and connectors to assemble the components that you need to deliver the data to and from the digital apps. We have coding capability. I'll show you that in a little bit more to make a great developer experience and make it easier for developers to create these things. And then the deployment pipeline, automating the creation of Docker containers, build, test, and deploy, automatically deploy right out to Kubernetes. So this all is taken away from you having to deal with as a customer. You can just work on the application code that powers those great digital apps and gets the thing out there quickly. And certainly in my experience at Citi, when we had this, as I mentioned earlier, this kind of push to get everything digitized, of course, we said in the IT department, we said, yeah, of course, we're going to do this right away. And we went and we found we couldn't quite do it as right away as the business wanted us to. And the biggest challenge we did have to reinforce what was found in the broader survey, the integration with the existing assets, the existing data sources, the existing applications was the biggest challenge we had. And this is what we are addressing here. And just a moment on we'll wrap this up in a couple of minutes here. And we'll get into the discussion part, but just as a brief moment or two to talk about what we're doing for developer experience. This all runs in VS Code, and the developer can see on the left-hand side the diagram of the integration and the data sources and the APIs they're calling. The functional steps are represented vertically, and the external calls and API calls and integration calls are represented on the horizontal lines. And the diagram creates the code that's shown on the left-hand side, and the code on the right-hand side. The code on the right-hand side creates the diagram on the left-hand side. So we've created a solution in the popular VS Code IDE for developers to be able to visually see simultaneously the integration code, the API code that are needed to support the digital apps in graphical format, which can be communicated with those who are responsible for evaluating whether the application is doing what it needs to do or not, and in the code so that developers can easily change and tweak and see the result of that in the diagram. So this really addresses the speed to market, the time to innovation, helps get the innovation out there quickly by providing a great developer experience, in addition to abstracting away the automation piece of it that helps deploy out to production. Just I think this might be the final word, just to say our product Choreo, though it's designed to work in the cloud and run on Kubernetes, also is designed to work in the hybrid world. We believe this is going to be for the foreseeable future. People are going to run current enterprise systems, run cloud systems, and especially if we're talking about developing new digital applications for those different new digital products to support those differentiated experiences. Those may be in the cloud, but they're going to rely on existing systems, data from existing systems, and that has to work seamlessly as well. Okay, so kind of run out. We said we're going to do about 20-30 minutes on the discussion, on the presentation, and have a discussion. Maybe I'll just go through, hit a couple of these points really quickly, because while I mentioned the platform, I haven't really mentioned much about the best practices that can apply across the board. And I don't want to make this just about us, even though I've tried to give some perspective on what the challenges are in building these great digital experiences and how we're trying to address them. Some things are just across the board that applicable to best practices on how you do these things. And just briefly here, cover a few of the highlights. The API first design principle is critical. The API has to be designed from the customer point of view. I've seen many times in my experience, an existing system and needs an API, and the staff says, okay, well, we'll just wrap that API, we'll expose the function that we have in our existing application out as an API, and we'll publish that, and then people can use it just like we use it. They can use it externally. Well, you don't know, how, as we talked about earlier, how customers are going to want to use something because they are not in your company. They are outside your company, and you need to understand their view when you design the API. You have to start with that. Start with the functionality, the service that you're providing as a business to that customer, and model the API based on that service, not model it based on the existing IT systems. You cannot be sure. It may be the same, but you cannot be sure that it is. You cannot assume that. You have to assume, you have to start by mapping the service you're trying to deliver to the customer into that API and work from there. Similarly, now when you're talking about microservices, it's very popular to say, yeah, you need microservices for everything, and microservices do provide agility and ease of update and ease of use for getting new versions out there. But do you really need all of them? Do you really need to go whole hog on microservices to the greatest extent that some of these digital pioneers have done? Not everybody is Google, not everybody is Uber, not everybody needs the ultimate sine qua non of cloud native benefits. So evaluate where you fall on this scale of benefits versus investment, because each benefit of the cloud, whether it's the auto scale, agility, increased resiliency, requires investment to achieve, because these are not built in to existing systems. Existing systems or new systems have to be designed for with these benefits in mind in order to achieve them. So what you want to figure out is where you want to go on this spectrum, and how much you want to invest to get what benefits. And that's an exercise that everyone just really needs to go through. Don't just assume, hey, I'm going to do microservices like Netflix did, even though that's an admirable goal. And we tried to do that at Citi when I was working on cloud migration. We never got there all the way, and that was okay. We got quite a bit of benefit out of following that model to as much as we could. So our idea was put a stake in the ground and say, okay, Netflix or Amazon or somebody who's doing this has the best practice in their implementation. Let's work back from there and see how far we want to go on that. Let's look at that as a target state, figure out our current state, and think about transitional steps to get there, and see what value we would get in that. And then we draw the line at a certain point if we have enough value in that investment. Small autonomous teams. Another thing to think about, because that kind of goes hand in hand with microservices, but it adds another dimension. The autonomous teams are also known as two pizza teams from the Jeff Bezos study, I don't know, 15, 16 years ago, where he discovered through studying the productivity of his development team that smaller teams were more productive, teams of about 14 or 15. I know it's often in enterprise IT environments, you might see teams of 30, 40, 50, 100, 200 sometimes. But according to the science, productivity levels reduce the more people are on a team because of the higher communication overhead. When you have a smaller team, everybody communicates more quickly, and they can take more responsibilities. I've talked to somebody who worked at the Amazon website in creating that, and worked on one of these two pizza teams, and they were given responsibility from beginning to end. Requirements to production, they wore beepers. If something went wrong with their microservice, they had to support it. Now, I'm not saying everyone needs to go, again, that far, but it's something else to take into account in terms of how can we improve productivity, how can we get that rapid iteration and time to market, breaking this task up into microservices, breaking the task up into giving responsibility to smaller teams, something definitely to think about. For all of this to be accomplished, governance needs to be put in place, and many people, of course, think of governance as the police saying what you can't do, but governance is an enabler if it's able to break up the problem into smaller pieces that can be iterated and put to production independently. Another friend of mine worked at Gilt Group, which is acquired by Hudson Retail in an effort to revamp their websites. Hudson Retail owns Hudson Stores, Saks Fifth Avenue, Lord & Taylor, which unfortunately kind of went out of business. But they hired this company who'd done a fashion flash sale website, very interactive, very highly scalable, and thought that by acquiring this company, they could revamp their website to be competitive with Amazon, which of course Macy's, Home Depot, others have had to do. And I talked to him once over breakfast. How's it going with your new company? He said, well, I've become a culture warrior. What are you talking about? Well, the old way of doing IT is if you had a bug, you would go through tests and schedule a release every month, and you'd line it up for that release. You'd really release the whole application. And here at Guild Group, if we have a bug in a microservice, we fix it, put it through auto test, and we deploy it the same day or the next day if it passes all the tests. And we're trying to put this culture into the bigger company. I don't think it worked in the end, sadly, but the point of this is culture through governance or other ways of understanding different ways of working can be even more of a challenge than this technology, and something else to really think about in terms of best practices. What is the culture in IT? What is the culture in the company that supports or doesn't support rapid change and rapid iteration to get the work on those great digital experiences out? Okay, that's it. I ran over a little bit of time there, David. Sorry about that, but I hope that it was some useful content.
No problem at all. I think that was a very, very fascinating discussion. As I suggested at the outset, there's going to be a lot of ground to cover, and you did cover it quite well. Some of the takeaways for myself, just again being reminded of that importance of customer expectations and the customer point of view throughout the entire process. I thought the point that you made about the comparison between product mentality and project mentality was something that I think probably gets overlooked quite a bit. The role of cloud as both an enabler of speed and enabler of scalability. Again, another key thing I think for people to think about with the cloud. And then again, just that enduring challenge of integration, both on the technical side with regard to core systems and legacy systems. And importantly, as you mentioned there toward the end, the issues of culture and just the individuals and the pathways and the procedures and processes that just have to be changed or even uprooted in some instances in order to make it work. We're going to go ahead and go into that discussion now and take on some of the questions, including these questions from you, our audience. So if you do have a question for Eric or a comment, please go ahead and use the comment feature there. We're going to be taking on those in just a moment. We're also going to be asking you a series of poll questions that we'd like to get your thoughts and opinions on. And I think what we'll do is we'll go ahead and ask the question, and then Eric and I will have a brief chat about some of the questions and thoughts that I had. And then we'll revisit the results after a brief moment to give you all an opportunity to fill out those poll results, sort of survey them and fill them out, and then we'll talk about them a little bit later. We've got 3 of those poll questions hopefully we'll be able to get to, and we'll go ahead and put up that first poll question for you to consider while Eric and I have a little bit of a chat about some of the things that he talked about. So the first poll question for you is, how important is cloud to innovation? And there are 3 options: highly important, moderately important, or, in your opinion, not really. So go ahead and fill out those your responses to those poll questions. Which of those 3 is you think the answer as far as you're concerned? And I'm going to go ahead and, while you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and ask Eric a few questions about the cloud and some of the things that he talked about. Sort of in summary, if you're going to give a sort of a bullet for people who are curious in terms of why they should deploy their application to the cloud, what would you say is sort of a summary or the main reason why that's such an important step for companies to consider?
Well, a couple of things here. One of the main things, of course, is how difficult it is to run your own data center compared to using a data center that the professionals run. Amazon and Google and Microsoft do this for hundreds, if not thousands, of companies, and they're pros at it. And every other company, especially financial institutions, that's not their line of business the way it is for a cloud provider. So having that offloaded or outsourced, I guess, if you will, can be a big advantage to take your mind off a lot of the operational concerns that otherwise you have to deal with the internal data centers. But more than that, the origin of the cloud was really to support web business models. So for a long time, we focused on enterprise IT and running an IT center that supported the business of the company. And now with digital transformations, the web has to come into that picture more strongly than it ever did before. And that's what the cloud really is designed to support: the web scale, the web agility, the web programming model, all of these things. It's no coincidence that cloud infrastructure came about through the investment of web companies in creating that kind of scalable and resilient infrastructure that's needed for 24/7 by 365 global commerce. You know, back in the early days, we would consider the web as something you bolted on with a web server that kind of provided the transition between enterprise IT and that wild west of the web. But now with digitization, it's come into the enterprise. It's become part of the enterprise IT and cloud infrastructure. It's really designed for that. So you'll find a better compatibility in the way the cloud works with what you want to do on with digital apps on the web or on mobile devices or IoT as we go forward than with the current infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. That makes quite a bit of sense. Let's go ahead and take a look and see if we've got the results for that first poll. Let's see if we can take a heat check on how folks feel about cloud and its importance to innovation. There we go. 50-50 split, it looks like, between highly and moderately. Surprise to you? Would you expected more in one category than the other there, Eric?
Well, I don't know. I was curious about this because for me, cloud agility speeds innovation. But innovation is not limited to the cloud. So I can see both sides of this. Innovation can be cultural, can be a seeding of ideas from an innovation center into the broader enterprise, and may or may not be dependent on the cloud. So I'm interested in the result, but I think it in both cases recognizes there's a role for cloud to play in innovation, an important role.
I think that's a good takeaway. Let's go ahead and we'll put our next poll question out there for our audience to consider and to respond to while we talk a little bit more about the challenges of cloud and best practices. Our next poll question is the lack of cloud skills holding you back from pursuing the opportunities in the cloud? And the three alternatives are big time, a little, or not really. So again, is the lack of cloud skills holding you back in terms of your ability to access that technology and innovate? Big time, a little, or not really? So Eric, I just wanted to, while the folks are going and responding to that one, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the challenges of a cloud migration. We talked a bit, you talked quite a bit about integration challenges. We talked about the importance of the cloud. What are some of the challenges that companies face primarily when it comes to undertaking this cloud migration?
Well, great question. It goes back to this sliding scale discussion that I touched on in the talk. Cloud native environments have significant benefits for digital apps, as we mentioned, around scale and resilience and always on. And the challenge is to figure out how much of that you need for your applications. And the reason why it's a challenge is because, as I mentioned before, the infrastructure has fundamentally different characteristics than the previous enterprise IT. The short way the industry describes this is they talk about existing enterprise ITs that basically, it's a bit of an oversimplification, but it's still coming from that kind of mainframe mindset of scaling up. You have a computer or a set of computers with some set of capacities, and you sort of size your application and your software according to capabilities of that hardware that you bought. But on the cloud, the model is that you can just add however many computers you need whenever you need to add them, and have a scale out pattern that's almost infinitely scalable. So, for example, at Citi, we had, I was working the payments area, and we would do Uber driver payments, ExxonMobil payroll payments, Department of Defense payroll, Airbnb, we got Airbnb payments in there. And we had a big challenge to size our systems sufficient for the peak capacity. And sometimes we would get multiples of these large files of payment requests on the same day, which really strain our systems. So we wanted to invest in the modern cloud architecture so that we could scale up automatically for seasonal workloads if we had such a situation where we got a huge pile of payment requests simultaneously due to calendar issues or whatever. And that would get us out of having to really figure out how much hardware did we need exactly to process this load. So going to the cloud gives you that flexibility to say, okay, well, we don't care, at least in the same way, about getting an unexpected load of work, similar to Rolling Stone tickets going on sale. The website would have an unexpected load, it would crash. In the cloud now, you get an unexpected load that you just get more, automatically get more capacity. And that's a fundamental change. And applications, the way you build applications has to be changed. The famous short summary on that is you have to go from monolith to microservices. And again, that's something you don't take just on the surface. You have to dig in and say, how much of that do I really need to do? But that's emblematic of the work that needs to be done. And so this is what we were trying to figure out the whole time, is how to do that work, how much of it we needed to do, and what kind of skill sets do we need to support that work to achieve our goals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let's go ahead and take a look at our poll results and see what the folks have weighed in on in terms of the lack of cloud skills being a limiting factor. A little bit of that. No one seems to think that it's a major impediment. No one seems to think it's no big deal, sort of in the middle. Your thoughts on those responses?
Well, yeah, that's very interesting. So I guess there's recognition that it is an issue, but also not really an issue. And maybe this is going back to the fact that innovation can be done outside of the cloud. There's nothing, cloud has a specific hold on innovation, such you can't do it somewhere else. So it could be just that. And again, also there's a question of how many people are going to the cloud, how many people facing that challenge. But it does seem like majority is finding some issue here, which is what I would expect, because cloud skills are different from the traditional enterprise skills in terms of understanding, is what I was talking about, is how to achieve the benefits of the cloud means you have to understand the new environment and figure out how to adapt to it and perhaps re-engineer for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We have one final poll question that we'd like to ask of our attendees and our audience here today. And we'll go ahead and put that poll question up here as we talk a little bit more about building digital apps, digital transformation, and importantly, the culture, which you mentioned toward the end. And this question is, are you asking the companies, are you planning to build new digital apps this year? And we have 3 response possibilities. Yes, lots, some, or not really. Again, the question being, are you planning to build new digital apps this year? Yes, lots, some, or not really. Sort of a low, medium, and high response there. And we'll go ahead and give you an opportunity to respond to that poll. And while we go ahead and continue our conversation, that'll be our final poll question for the day. Eric, I want to talk a little bit about, again, digital app development, about digital transformation. In terms of some of the best practices in developing apps in the cloud, what would you say are some of the key considerations there?
We want to make sure everything is very responsive, scalable, and in particular handles data in a good way. I go back to the Netflix case study often when I think about these things, because I followed it very closely in terms of trying to provide a model for the work we were doing at Citi on cloud migration. And people often will say, well, we're using a SQL database, we're using Oracle for our data. Let's just keep doing that. It all runs in the cloud, and just move that over. But the cloud scale opened up the whole question of what was the right data store. And that Netflix uses 5 or 6 different data stores for different purposes. And I think it's worth cracking that nut open and saying, well, we've sort of for years in the enterprise standardized on relational data stores and SQL types of databases. But in the cloud, we've got an emergence of NoSQL data stores, and primarily because SQL didn't scale for some of the use cases. We got big data stores, Hadoop and Snowflake and other things that provide huge, vast amounts of data for analytics and for AI. And we have to start thinking about things like, the most recent example for AI, you need to support a huge data set potentially to get significant results from AI and machine learning. And this requires a different kind of data storage. Similarly, search needs to be optimized. If you're creating a great digital app, you want to be able to, if somebody's typing in a name and address, you gotta validate that right away. That can't be slowing you down. You have to have a great experience. And if somebody's waiting for you to validate name, address, phone number, validate the data that needs to be checked against the server, you need to find a good way to search and cache and provide very good latency for any of those activities on the digital app that require going back to the server to check on some data. That's another thing that's changed, and there are different approaches to handling data to support those activities. So I would say that's one of the key things to really check on is one size does not fit all for data anymore. Data is hugely important for these digital apps, and getting the right solution for the right data patterns, whether it's AI searching for optimizing the customer experience or looking for new sales opportunities from the trending data for how customers interact, or with sentiment data for investing. This requires specialized types of data, or search, as I mentioned, to find the name and address, go through the catalog, present the catalog items very easily, present all the options for managing accounts very quickly. This requires certain caching data with memory access to have the data readily available. So these kinds of things have to be considered. We can't just think everything's going to work on the same type of data store as we used to think.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at the results for our final poll, asking whether or not companies are planning to build new digital apps this year. And we'll take a look at the results here in just a minute and get a sense. Pretty
Wow.
Even across the board. Great. Wow. Okay. So yeah. So it looks like almost a perfectly even split between yes, lots, some, and not really. Is that a surprise to you at all, or is that what you'd expect? That there's a fairly diverse opinions and strategies on this.
Well, we've been, as I've been talking about through this presentation, we've been kind of focusing on this area to see what we can do as vendors to help enable the building of great digital experiences. So we're kind of thinking, we're kind of in that bubble of, we're talking with people who are interested in doing it, and how can we help? So I was very curious to see, are we kind of in the bubble and talking to ourselves about how important this is, or are people really working on this and really challenged with it? And it looks like it's a range as before. So maybe we shouldn't get too excited that everybody's facing this challenge, but it seems like quite a few people are.
Absolutely. Definitely. You've got both of the yes, lots and some categories certainly is giving some indication that this is definitely a direction that a lot of folks are headed in. We've only got about 5 minutes or so left. I want to thank everyone for participating in our poll. We have just a few more questions I thought we would maybe take up before we wrap up. And I thought maybe going back to sort of the one of the main things I thought that you emphasized a couple of different times in terms of the challenge of digital transformation sort of writ large, what you saw is the biggest challenges to that project, and maybe what role culture plays in that. Is culture something that can be changed or needs to be changed in order for digital transformation to take place? How much of a challenge does culture present, as well as some of the legacy issues that you talked about as well as being potential inhibitory factors when it comes to an effective digital transformation? What are some of your thoughts there, maybe as a way of wrapping up?
Well, David, I think you put your finger on it when you mentioned culture. We can bring in all kinds of new technologies and new capabilities, but if we don't have the culture of thinking about the customer first and finding a way to get in touch with the customer, or understanding the right way to apply the new technologies to the problem, we're going to always be inhibited on the amount we can accomplish. I often said, working at Citi, that the technology of moving to the cloud and migrating to the cloud, which is what I was working on mainly for a number of years, that this was not as much of an issue as the cultural challenge of moving to things such as automating the release process. There was such a embedded culture on how applications would be brought to production, based on, of course, years of challenges around having applications go into production and having incidents during that process. Many surveys of production incidents show that change is the biggest cause of production incidents. And the reason for that is because when you do make a change, these applications can be so complex after being built up over sometimes 20, 30 years. You make a change in one place and you cannot really understand all of the potential knock-on effects in other areas of the application that might be affected by that change. It's so complex to manage and make changes without causing incidents that there's a lot of, some people might call it scar tissue or bureaucracy built up around the whole change management process to try to make sure it doesn't happen, when the root cause is actually the complexity of the applications. And you want to go to the root cause and say, let's break this application up, make it simpler, redo it, incorporate modern technologies. But everybody's so busy trying to, put on the Band-Aids and put their finger in the dike and make sure that the problems don't occur. With the current system, it's very hard to get everybody to focus on, really, this could be done better if we changed everything. It's a great analogy that a guy I used to work for at Credit Suisse, the global chief architect. I was the divisional chief architect. And he had this story about an architect walking through the woods and seeing somebody cutting down a tree and watching for a minute and saying to the lumberjack, that would go a little faster if you sharpened your axe. And he said, no, I don't have time for that, which is really what happens. People just get so heads down on trying to get done what they need to get done. It's hard to stop for a minute and take a look and say, how can we really do this better? And that's the culture, to me, the big sort of epitomizes the cultural challenge.
Yeah, it's really good. Something so small and so huge at the same time. One thing I really do appreciate, and you've done it throughout the presentation, I think, is really negotiate that balance between the imperative that's there, that the customers demand these things, and if you're going to compete, you're just going to have to come up with a way of delivering them, and at the same time respecting the complexity, respecting the fact that it isn't easy for companies to do. There are challenges, but those are challenges that can be overcome. They're both processes, they're best practice, and as you mentioned, there are tools that are available to help companies make these sort of processes work.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up again. I would be remiss in my current role if I didn't mention our tools again, and having the platform that we're building, hopefully helping with addressing a lot of these challenges around complexity and delivering quickly new experiences to market. So that's hopefully what we're going to be able to achieve on the next round of development and growth in our company. We'll be able to be successful there in helping people with these challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to put a point on that's about all the time we have for our presentation today, but I wanted to let everyone know that if you're going to be attending Finovate Spring coming up in about 2 weeks, or less than 2 weeks, in San Francisco, and you'd like to meet with WSO2, you can use the Contact Us button there on your dashboard, and a representative from Informa will be on hand and more than happy to help facilitate a meeting with the folks from WSO2 to find out more about this and some of the ways that they can work with you, talk with you, and help you, again, in terms of your own cloud migration and digital transformation processes and plans. So definitely, if that's something that's going to be happening, if you're going to be at Finovate Spring, definitely consider touching base with WSO2. You can do that with the Contact Us button right there on your dashboard. As I mentioned, that is all the time we have for today, unfortunately. I want to thank Eric for a fascinating presentation. I got a kick looking at the storyboard before the presentation, so I got a little bit of something to look forward to. So it was really kind of fun to see you bring all of these ideas and insights to life. So thank you very, very much for that. I also want to thank you, our attendees, for watching our program today and for being attendees to all of our Finovate webinars. So once again, thank you for joining us. Have a great day and a wonderful week.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everyone.